Are we ready to start? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Education Policy Committee meeting. This meeting is scheduled to last for 5 to 5:45. Just to do a brief overview of the agenda, we're going to start with introductions, then public comment, and then we're going to have a extensive discussion on the, or take it a little bit deeper on the student cell phone use policy, and have a discussion somewhat about, a short discussion about our engagement. Director Wong has a cell phone resolution, a draft cell phone resolution that we're going to have a discussion about, and also House Bill 2753, which relates to the Board of Education stipends. And then we also, I'm just going to dispense with this right now, the last item on the agenda are policies referred for first readings at both the field trip, foreign travel, and other office campus activities, and the promotion and retention of students. Unless we have public comment at the beginning, those at the last meeting, we referred them out for a first reading, which actually hasn't happened yet. So there's nothing that's happened since the last meeting. So I apologize for anybody who came for that item, but there's not, we're going to have the first reading at the August 6th meeting. We'll have 21 days for public comment, and then we'll have a scheduled second reading or make adjustments based on public comment. So with that, I'm just going to start with introductions and just start, I guess, just at the dais or one off the dais. Kara, do you want to just start?
Yes, I'm Kara Bradshaw, Executive Assistant.
Mary Kane, Senior Legal Counsel.
Liz Large, Contracted General Counsel.
Eddie Wong, Board Member.
Michelle DePass, Board Member.
Julia Brum-Edwards, Board Member and the Committee Chair.
JJ Kunsavi, Student Representative.
Patty Sullivan, Board Member.
Great. And thanks for everybody for coming today. We're going to start with public comment, and I'm just going to say we have 5 slots open. We have just one person signed up, so if somebody came, if they wanted to provide comment on the 2 policies that we are going to get first read, you can, between now and the time the one person who signed up finishes, if you want to if you want to let us know that you want to speak, we can open up a 2-minute slot. So go ahead, Kara, if you want to.
Yes, we have Kyra Caspary.
Do you want to call the person forward again? Or?
Yeah, Kyra Caspary.
Are you here, Kyra? Okay. Does anybody else want to take a 2-minute slot before we move into the meeting? Roseanne? Okay, we're going to just jump into the first topic. And I'm going to allot about 50 to 55 minutes for this discussion, so we can get through the other items and also Director Wong's resolution. So with that, what we thought we would do today is we have a draft that staff offered as sort of a starting point or a straw man, and we have had comments that were offered to, and these are all posted, that were offered by Director Wong, and also comments from our previous student rep, Frankie Silverstein. And I will say, I think the best thing to do is for us when we go through this to, like, section by section, is to use the version that has Director Wong's comments on it, and then I will bring in Frankie Silverstein, the former student rep's comments. And so if you want to follow along, the version we'd be using, the way you can tell it's the right version is in, at the very end, it has a C in italics that says the district shall provide the necessary support and resources for the schools to implement this policy. That's the one we're going to work off of.
Okay.
Does that work? I think as a frame up, I'm going to ask Liz or Mary for you to just walk through section by section, and we'll see if there are, and maybe offer any sort of context or nuance that you want to add. And I think what we'll use this time to do is like gather questions if people have concerns about a provision.
So we, in some of our planning discussions, had instructional leaders here. We have.
Great.
And I'm wondering.
Do you want to introduce how you want to do it?
Yeah, this is at your discretion, Julia, so it's not my preference. If you would like them up here now, it might be a time to walk through section by section with them. I think they're here to answer questions and talk about implementation hurdles. Shall we invite them up here?
That'd be great.
Okay.
So come on up and introduce
Yes.
yourself. I still would you like you to start, like at least kick off, like here's what our thinking was if you modified it all from the LA policy, and then we'll go to the panel and then board members. Because this is a committee meeting, not a formal board meeting, it's much more discussion style, so we have a much more less formal style.
So Julia, I would be happy to walk through section by section. I don't have the red line version when we were modifying the draft. As just to recall for everyone watching, this was a straw man discussion draft. This is we're now working off the one that's in board books that was with some additional modifications from Director Wong, but the bulk of this is from the LAUSD policy, massaged, I would say. So happy
Director Wong's versions isn't that different? So.
I agree. No, I agree. I'm just clarifying how we got here and
okay.
what's in these guidelines, and we're happy to walk through. I think, please introduce yourselves. Let's do that.
Sure. I am James McGee, principal of Grant High School.
Dr. Harriet V. Mignon, principal at Beaumont Middle School.
And Kristen McCloskey, Senior Director of Schools.
Thank you for coming today.
And we have 3 other senior directors in the audience, too, so I don't know if you want to come join the party.
I think we're available as needed.
Okay.
And happy to be moral support, and also Dr. Frank Ravel is here virtually.
Wonderful. I didn't see that.
Would you introduce yourself?
Lauren Caspa, one of our Senior Director of Schools. Hi, Karina Wolf, Senior Director of Schools.
And Isaac Cardona, Senior Director of K-8 Schools.
Thank you for all taking the time this afternoon to be here. We really appreciate, and we're going to be very interested in your school-based perspective and district-based perspective of the policy.
So the general guidelines are that students may have phones, but the expectation is that they will be turned off during the school day. We kept the language, as you can see, we kept it rather broad, allowing for a number of options depending on the school. I know that some schools currently are using Yonder, but that's just one of a number of ways in which schools can prohibit cell phones and other like devices during normal school hours. So we didn't want to put a specific type of implementation of how to keep the phones away, because we don't know what our financials will be, and we want to offer schools some options. Do you want to let's stop there and just, or what would you like me to do?
Stop there. It's not a very long policy, so I think we can do it that. So I'm going to jump in and maybe just like model how we can do the discussion. So I'm curious, both from our school-based leaders, but also just in from a legal standpoint. Have we covered all ways in which students might access the internet or social media? Like, we don't have watches here, but does the definition cover everything? And again, I know how creative students are.
To the extent they have Chromebooks, they have access to the internet. So for these kinds of devices, we tried to be as cell phones or similar devices and the electronic signaling, but there are lots of ways to access the internet in a school.
I think when it comes down to it, and we've talked about this previously, the technology moves so quickly that to put something very specific into the policy might not serve us. That we're better off with then school-based rules, right? So for this year, I don't know what the newest thing is going to be next year, but allowing the schools to be able to set those parameters made sense to us.
But all those things,
I have a question about, so in the library or media room, though, what about for research purposes? Would that be an allowable use in the library?
Well, I believe that every student has a Chromebook in the district. They will be able to use that for research purposes. They wouldn't need a cell phone to do the research because of their Chromebook.
I think it's helpful to think about two different pockets. One is access to social media, and one is access to devices, personal devices. And there's not a full overlap of those things, if that helps with the discussion.
Would it be helpful to include devices with cameras? For example, now we got smart glasses going on, right? And some smartwatches can take pictures, because one of the issues that arise in schools is that students are taking photos and using it on social media, or bullying an extreme example, right? And so I feel like, would it be helpful to have a mention of cameras?
I think if we,
number C?
Going back to my original idea, is keeping it as high level as possible, and then allowing as each new development, this year is the cameras on the glasses, next year is going to be, I don't know what it will be, but it will be something. And so to have more general language, which we have, we talk about photos.
In 1C.
Thank you.
So in 1C, for example, would it be our similar devices or devices with similar capabilities? Because it's in that one, it's like the capability versus the device.
And it might be helpful for our school leader when we talk about the problems the policy is trying to address. So we've now surfaced, one is distraction in the classroom. What's the ability for students to focus, which is that you must put your phone in a pouch solves that problem. It's not with you. Again, we can get to other glasses or watches. So one issue is focus in the classroom. Another is access to social media. Another is photo taking, right? And so I think by identifying the biggest challenges for the school and try to match the policy to the problem trying to be solved, and I'm sure there are others, I'm just repeating what I've heard. You all are the experts about what you would like help solving in the schools and what would be helpful or not. So maybe you could talk to that.
So it's at Grant High School, I speak for Grant, it's twofold. One is to create greater engagement. Student engagement with teachers, their instruction, and each other. And then the second part is addressing problematic behaviors. I think you just mentioned, Director Wong just mentioned one of them, which is, the overwhelming majority of bullying takes place now via a smartphone. And so, we have situations where, student A is just going from one class to another class, and a student will snap a picture of them and post it, talking about what they're wearing and those type of things. I'll also add, at Grant High School with the policy we're going to be moving forward with next year, and we're still working on it to perfect it. We've been very clear with students, parents, and teachers that smart watches will be included as well. And you're correct, technology is moving swiftly, and as we learn of the newest technologies that we believe will be problematic, we'll add those as well. Really, the goal here is to create greater engagement, for our students in the classroom, but also outside the classroom as well, and to address those problematic behaviors that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis. In 2024, when principals arrive at schools, we're dealing with behavior issues that happen on a Saturday night amongst our students. And typically it is through either a cell phone, smartphone, or a computer. And so those are things that we're addressing every single day of the week. And so our goal here is to eliminate that issue, but also, just as importantly, stronger engagement amongst our students, again, with their teachers, with their instruction, and with one another.
What about the middle school level?
Well, we have some of the same problems, some of the same issues, some of the same challenges, and we selected the pouch option because the devices are very expensive, and we do not want teachers to be responsible for either keeping them or on their desk or in their closet, or because they're very, very expensive. I'll give you a scenario. In the past, many years ago, a teacher said, "Let me have your cell phone," sat it on the desk, into the class, the cell phone wasn't there. So with this pouch, the students are able to keep their items with them. No one else is engaging with their item, and they're responsible for it, but they just can't use it. We do have students also having those challenging behaviors in between classes. They may go to the bathroom, text, send messages about something like, "I'm going to fight someone after school." And so the way some of the apps work, students have all of their friends or all of their grade level or just anybody they know on their app, like Snapchat, and they'll send a message that says, "This is going to happen at 3 o'clock over by the cafeteria." And because we're not on their list of friends, we won't necessarily see that. And the only way we might find out about it is if a concerned student comes and tells us, "Hey, something is going to happen." So we're fortunate when that happens, but it doesn't always happen. So we could talk about the issues all day, but without the cell phone, we do believe students will develop their skills more around communication. During the pandemic, students didn't talk to each other. When they came back to school that first year, they didn't talk to the teacher. They were very quiet. They all wore their masks, so they weren't communicating. And so I personally, and I'm sure you agree, believe that some students are behind developmentally in the skill of communication. So that engagement with the teacher, their curriculum, being able to discuss their ideas, being able to discuss with their peers, the curriculum, or any other social emotional issue, is better done in person than through the devices. And I will say that sometimes the message you send impacts a person in a way that you didn't intend for it to impact them, right? Just like with the email. If you send an email, what you thought you were saying was not what that person received. And then with students, because, well, especially in middle school, their frontal lobe is not developed, so what they think you said, they're ready to take action, but they didn't really understand what you said. So the ability to be able to talk face-to-face, communicate, talk with the counselors or whoever they need to, will be optimal.
And also, if you don't mind me asking, what you're hearing right now is our lived experience as administrators. But over the last few years, there's been some really rich peer-reviewed research on the dangers of social media platforms and smartphones on our students, particularly our teen girls. And so this goes beyond just what we're seeing, what we're experiencing in our schools. It also is the research that, we've been reading. The other piece I also want to include is, next year at Grant High School, our expected enrollment is over 2,200 students. And we chose Yonder because I was concerned about how can we scale up. And with the Yonder pouches, the students will have those when they arrive at school. And it's a way for us to actually implement it for 2,200 students. They're just, we looked at some other ways of being able to do this, going cell phone free for our students during the school day. But it was difficult in finding those ways that we could scale it up. And this was not something that I, speaking for myself, just said, in May, this is what we're going to do. We've been looking at this. I've been, thinking about this for quite a while, going all the way back to my days as a VP at Lincoln High School, because it's not a new issue. We're just seeing these, issues, particularly after the pandemic, increase. So it's been going on for a while. I think the research is catching up as well.
I'm sure my personal experience as a parent aligns with a lot of that research. Because my kids were going through middle school and high school about the time that everybody started getting cell phones. Thanks for the input. I have just a question about the language. Is an electronic signaling device, that sounds so like archaic, or is that like the term of art for anything that like social media could be transmitted?
We can look at other terms. We took that from some sample policies. Again, this was a starting point for discussion, and we blended some concepts.
So that's just a question I would have on that section.
Some follow-up questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know, because it seems like we might be moving to another topic.
No, go ahead.
Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to follow up on your comments, because I think it's very important to hear from your lived experiences. So my question is that, because Principal McGee, we talked on the phone before about how Grant has tried no cell phone policies before, right? And that's kind of what pushed the move to the Yonder pouches, right? And so one of the issues that we're facing as a district is, if we want to scale it up, right? And right now, your schools are kind of the first ones to adopt the pouches, and we'll see how that goes, right? Now we're looking at this policy, and we're trying to have something for the rest of the district. And my question for you is, like, I don't know how familiar you are with this policy, but are there I don't want to say mistakes. Are there things from your experiences that you would recommend in terms of changing? Like lessons learned, like one example is, like, I've heard from B, general guidelines on B, right? I heard from a lot of teachers already, and my personal experience is that they recommend not having cell phones also allowed during lunch, right? So it should be, the policy should just be like, no cell phones during class time on campus, right? So if students want to leave campus to go to lunch, because some high school students can, they're allowed to be off campus and have their phones. So like, what do you have, that's one example, but if you have more thoughts,
well,
would love
just
to hear your experience.
The example you just gave, students having their smartphones during lunch. At Grant, students will not have access to their cell phones throughout the school day, including passing time and at lunch. Often that is when we see some of the more problematic behaviors. And so students will not have access to the devices during that time as well. At Grant, our goal is to give students a 7-hour respite from this technology that we're seeing cause so many issues. And you're right, we did have a pretty robust cell phone policy this past year. It was about a year ago. I shared it with our community and our teachers, and cell phones had to be put away during class time. I purchased caddies for each classroom, so students were expected or required to put their cell phones in the caddies. It happened much of the time, but not all the time. We had teachers who were on top of it all the time. Unfortunately, it wasn't true with all of our teachers. I mean, I must have taken away probably about 300 or 400 cell phones myself this year from students who had them during class time. They never put it in a caddy, and now, a notification has gone off, and they're in the hallway. And it was very seldom that I ever saw a student going to the restroom without their cell phone and reading their cell phone. And so we tried this past year, and unfortunately it was not successful. On top of that, with as many teachers we have, every day there's going to be subs. And, I would go into a classroom where I know we had subs and look in those caddies and no cell phones. And so then I would have to, be principal, right? And do what I need to do. Our students, our current students, someone asked me, did you do a survey of the students? I did talk to roughly maybe about 25, 30 students prior to sending it out. But the reality is, I did not need to send out a survey to know students were not going to be happy with this. And me being me, we don't ask students, to complete a survey on whether or not they want healthy meals. And I see it the same way. And so I've been pleased by the response we've received from parents. Overwhelming majority of parents are in support of it, because they're struggling as well, to put these limits when it comes to technology on their students.
I'm not sure if you all have seen the research, but we can share some of the research with you around cell phones creating the same feelings as drugs. That addiction behavior happens with a cell phone. Some students are able to manage it more easily than others, depending on what their parents, how their parents train them at home or what the parents' expectations are. Additionally, it affects their ability to stay focused, because with the messages or little prompts they get every couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, a lot of times the students will have their phones turned off, but it may be on vibrate. So any friend, your mom, grandma, someone send you a message every couple of minutes, you're pulling out your pocket, okay, who sent me a message? They're easily distracted with all of the constant messages or notifications that they're getting from their phones, and it's all day long. Hundreds of notifications throughout the day each student receives. And so do we want them to focus on their instruction, or do we want them to focus on their device and the notifications? If we look at statistics, the international test and exam that's done, American students are behind. We want our students to be able to compete internationally with other countries so that they're getting the best possible education, they're getting the best possible access to instruction so they can compete with their peers around the world. This is one way to help them stay focused and to experience that, what is the term they use for struggle? The productive struggle. Right, with their education. If you're reading something, you're not sure, okay, let me think about it. Being able to help them develop critical thinking skills. We need our kids to have everything that everyone else has around the world. Cell phones, the cell phones are distractions, and if we can remove that distraction, I believe you can see some of the studies at other schools around the country that have used this technology or this device to help to keep the technology put away during the day. Test scores do go up.
And along those same lines, I must say this, cell phones and the challenges with cell phones is affecting all of our kids. But it's having a profound effect, I believe, on our lower performing students. They are intentionally or unintentionally using it as an active distraction. And because there's not a really, I want to say a robust cell phone policy, sometimes teachers don't know how to respond. Again, we've been very clear at Grant, our expectation, but we see it every single day. Students who we need to engage with, it's the cell phones. That is an impediment. Not the only one, but obviously it's a challenge.
And
sorry.
I was just going to say, Beaumont has had a policy for several years. We're just adjusting our policy to include this additional measure to have the phones put away during the school day. This isn't the first year.
I want to ask, I was just going to ask JJ if you...
Yeah, well, it's great hearing your guys' experience as building leaders. I think my two questions will be, will students be allowed to have their phones if they're on a field trip and if they eat off campus?
I would say no. When two students are on field trips, they're with adults. I know at the middle school, it's a 1-to-10 ratio. All the adults have a cell phone. If there's an emergency, whatever venue they're at, there are telephones there. So if someone had to call 911 or a parent, they have all the information that they need as adults. And then that way, students can fully engage in the experience.
Also, there are handheld unlocking devices that we are requiring our teachers, when they go on a field trip, to take one of them. So if there was a reason where students needed those Yondr pouches unlocked, they would have the ability.
What about, so at lunchtime, all the high school campuses, or most of them, almost all of them, are open. So if you, whether you have Yondr pouches or not, essentially you go out, if you're at Cleveland, like my daughter was, you'd go over to Powell to grab something to eat. But the assumption would be they wouldn't have their phones with them.
Correct. Again, when we're talking about the problematic behaviors, during passing time and during lunch is when we see a lot of it. And often it's coordinated via a smartphone.
I wanted to bring somebody else to the table, because I think one of the things, as we're looking at sort of our general educational settings, these are really good questions, but there are some, and that's why there's some movement in the proposed policy, because we have some alternative programs that operate a little differently. And Karina Wolf, if you could come up and kind of speak to some of the needs of the programs that you oversee, and there are things like Reconnection Services Alliance, those schools.
Hi, good afternoon. So within alternative ed, thank you for the question, Mary. So within alternative ed, lots of people have seen and referenced that Mount Scott is a contracted private alternative school that we have approximately 160 students attend. And they implemented Yondr multiple years ago, and they have a closed campus, and it has worked really well for them. We have other alternative schools, MLC as an example, in district, it's a K-12 that has a 7/12 cell phone policy, and they have a written agreement that they have students sign, parents sign, and their homeroom teacher sign, and they have it demonstrated what happens with the first infraction, the second infraction, and the third infraction, and it's gone wonderfully. We also have Alliance, who those teachers also, there's two campuses, Alliance campuses. The teachers at Alliance at Meek started exploring. Some teachers did a great, fantastic job getting information and exploring different resources. They actually went to visit Pacific Crest and some other folks, and had Yondr folks come last year, I guess. And they were very interested in implementing. We had some questions because we had not had, as an in-district school, had these questions come to the surface yet. So brought some of those questions back to Mary Kane and legal counsel. This year, the Alliance teachers have, the Principal Ferguson took a survey at the end of the school year, and it's really different by campus. So the teachers at the 5-day campus, the MEET campus, the survey showed that they overwhelmingly would like Yonder or wanted a school, those pouches. And the teachers and community at Alliance at Kenton and the Reconnection Services really feel strongly against, and that it's detrimental and a barrier to wonderings about to what degree is it a barrier when we're trying to re-engage students who've been out of school, students who are parents, students who are working, students who care for others. So just what are the thoughts and considerations for older students or students who, again, we're trying to re-engage? And so part of what the feedback at this point was, with the guidance from Dr. Franco, is really looking at which I'm hearing from Principal McGee and Dr. V, is looking at where are schools in implementing a school-wide cell phone policy, and how has that gone? How are teachers and staff kind of coalescing and have some shared experience around what a school-wide cell phone policy is, prior to asking for or requesting the Yonder pouches. So we're in that process. But I would say within alternative ed, some schools, it's a variation, and it fits within the school model. I mean, that's really kind of the guidance or the kind of guiding factor. So I don't disagree with anything I've heard colleagues say, and we're looking at what are different communities of learners and what is a different impact. So happy to answer any other questions.
On the surveys that are linked here, were staff at the alternative schools included?
This might be a question for Eddie.
I don't remember. In the document, it does list which schools that it came from. So if you look at, I'm sorry.
Was it Benson only one?
It was Benson only is the one I'm looking at, but
Yeah, so it would be the other one, not the staff survey one, but the example.
the cell phone policy survey results.
Yes, PPS cell phone policy survey results. So I'm looking through it right now.
So there's a list.
There are not any alternative schools in that list.
No.
Looks like there's one response from MLC.
Yeah, but I don't think we have a number of how many.
And I would also just, as a comment, I would just say in the MLC cell phone policy, students do get their cell phones at lunch, and that's part of the policy, that they get their cell phones at lunch and then they turn them back in after lunch.
The draft we have now, the draft does have them having access during lunchtime. So I'm going to keep us
Unless the school has a stricter policy. So that's the flexibility I was talking about. So for certain schools, they may determine that that's keeping that 7 hours of social media freedom.
Of respite. I think it's really compelling that what you said, Principal McGee, about when you're noticing things are happening, bad behaviors are happening specifically at lunchtime and at hall passing times, is important to make a note of at your building.
It's the same at Beaumont, and also there's communication about what's happening after school, who's going to do what to whom, and
And that's happening during the school day, at lunch, and during passing periods. Okay.
So I'm just noting in 1E at the very end of the paragraph, that's where it says the school administrator may establish and enforce a stricter policy.
Or 1B. Also 1B.
So it seems, so it seems like if that's the general philosophy about any of this, then it should be a standalone piece, or is it just they can establish a stricter policy around the hours or around the confiscation? Because it seems like it's that instead of applying to the whole policy, applies to just 2 of the clauses.
I think that's the intent, that it applies to those clauses, but that's another policy decision for the board. How much discretion would individual schools have for the entire I mean, I assume it's not the entire policy, but that's, again, there are a number of ways for the board to craft this.
Okay, so I think that's a question we should all come back to, because to me, there's some other, like, the videos or photos, I guess. What do you think? Do you think it should apply to the full policy, or just those two items that you could establish something stricter than the district-wide policy?
I was actually wondering if we might even want to add something, like, because at the end, 1F says that nothing in the policy should interfere with a student's individual education plan, right? And so there's exceptions. Should we also include exception for, like, alternative programs, for example, right?
Can I just say one thing? I would think that a sentence around "unless the school has a stricter policy" seems like it would cover it. I'm actually thinking of our kids in day in residential treatment who have lots of technology restrictions in addition, but just a blanket sentence would cover it.
I'm sorry, where would that sentence be, Karina?
The whole policy or just those 2 points?
That's what I think the way that it was, if there was a sentence like that for the whole policy, or that either one, but if it's somehow referenced unless the school has a stricter policy, then I think that's a good catchment for some other needs. Excuse me, Dr. V, were you going to say something?
I was just going to mention too, there are some students that use their device to monitor their glucose numbers. So there are some Yonder pouches that would meet their need, where they'd be able to manage their medication and numbers without interference of the pouch.
So where is that exemption in the current policy?
So I think that's
would that be an F? It would be 1F. We could add
typically those students would be under an
sentence.
IEP plan.
It's the 504.
504.
Or not necessarily.
Not for their, like, glucose
not
monitoring.
necessarily.
So we should
And
probably add
we were
something.
very clear that there would, be exceptions for students who need their technology for medical reasons.
Yes.
Okay, so I would ask staff if you can come back to, like, some language to be added into one.
Yeah, or other requirement to access the educational programming at the school is intended to be very broad. If you would like to be more specific, we can add language.
Because it's come up several times, I would like to have at least the health reference, because, and then leave in or the requirements to access educational programming.
Would you like other health requirement?
Right, whatever language.
Well, it could be health or other reason to have a device accessible.
What would be another reason? I'm just...
Anything medical, it would be glucose monitoring. I don't know if there's heart monitoring.
Yeah, I'm just thinking medical, because I was thinking, were you saying any other exception? Because at least it kind of broad.
I guess I was thinking medical.
Medical specifically. Okay, thank you.
Whether heart monitor or glucose monitor.
So would you like us to remove or other and make it more specific to, or?
No, I would just add in the health piece. I would leave in the catch-all you have still, because it may not be an IEP or 504.
So medical or other.
So it's just adding in, like I say, it has often been raised, like just in the last couple of months, as a reason not to do it. So I think we should just be explicit, like that's what we're not trying to, all of that.
May I jump in? I do think we have to be specific, because when we say medical needs, that could be anything. And we could have parents who use it for any reasons, even like anxiety,
Right.
where the research is telling us that this is leading to anxiety. We will get those requests, I promise you.
Okay, I'm going to ask staff to come up with the next meeting, some sort of language that is specific enough, but that, does that, I don't think we need to resolve it right now.
Yeah.
So I think one section, I think we should have two adds to the beginning of the policy. One, just a value statement. And we may take some language specifically from Director Wong's, like, why are we doing this? I think it's always good to lay out your values. So have a value statement at the beginning. And then I also think we should have a definition section, just so we don't clunkily, it makes it easier then to read the policy.
Other than referring to the devices, what are the terms that you think are I think
we're going to collect them, so if we could just have a, because, for example, I don't know what an electronic signaling device is. So if that's left in, like, what is that?
To watch. May I add, I do want to see the peer-reviewed research, if you would be so kind to share that, and because it helps us decide what we're kind of solving for. And you mentioned some of the things, students being able to talk to each other, having the skills to speak to their teachers and their peers. We're trying to solve for that. We're trying to solve for a sense of, Surgeon General talked about social media, loneliness,
Avoidance.
Avoidance.
We've seen a lot of that.
The bullying, and so if
just even avoidance, where
yes,
students are avoiding each other or educators, staff,
So I'd like to see the research so we can put that kind of preamble up front in the policy, and we can understand what we're trying to solve, and it could be a value statement.
Yeah. JJ, go ahead, jump in.
Right, I have 3 questions, but I'll just ask them one at a time. So my first question, as like a medical issue, would mental health count as one?
Well, we have counselors in school buildings. When students have incidences of anxiety or other mental health crises, we definitely get them connected with a staff member in the building that has the training to support their needs. So I think that if a student has, for example, at Beaumont, in the office, we have little slips for students to say, I need to talk to this person, or I need to talk to a counselor. I need to talk to somebody now. And they can come to the office also and just say, I need to talk to someone right now. And we find them someone to talk to communicate with, whether it's their parent or their counselor or their private counselor. In some cases, we do have private counselor phone numbers. So the individuals that I work with outside of the building, they're able to talk with them in times of crises.
And then my next question is, would this policy apply to contracted alternative schools as well?
That's a good question. Thank you. So contracted alternative schools are their own organizations, and so with their own boards, and they set their own policies. And so what they do is they would crosswalk our policies. So they have some liberties. So not as kind of overarching policies they do, and we have some unique ways of how we can crosswalk. So there's some flexibility for them in their guidance from their organizations or within our contracts with them.
Right. And then my next question would be, would students be allowed to bring like their personal devices, for example, like iPads, like MacBooks, Chromebooks from home to school, and will they be allowed to use that?
We discourage that because if it's lost, stolen, or broken by another student, the district will not replace it. Every student has been assigned a device that they can use. If that one breaks, they get a loaner device from the school, so they're able to get a device during the school day if they need it. Personal devices can get stolen, they can get broken by someone, and then you have parents arguing about who's going to pay for the repair. So we discourage personal devices.
And it's also easier to monitor or eliminate apps when we're using district issued devices.
Thank you.
Great. I'm going to keep us moving because I also want to be cognizant of the time. So we've, I think, covered A, B, and C. I think there's a decision around lunchtime and whether we want to include that or not. I'm assuming on D there's not really any issue. The only thing I would ask is, I'm assuming this is when they're on school grounds, which might need to be added.
Yes.
Okay.
School grounds or school activities?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I also, on this one, on D, I'm sorry, just lost my train of thought, but that's, students must comply anytime a request is made, but that also places the burden on the staff, which I thought that was one thing we were also trying to solve for, was putting the teachers in a position of having to police.
Well,
a good portion of their day could be.
Well, who else is going to do it if the student's not?
Policing is a strong word.
Monitoring.
Tier 1 intervention started in the classroom. And so there's a certain level of expectation that we should have of our teachers. And so and at the same time, I want to eliminate the power struggles between a student, not wanting to give up their cell phone and the teacher, demanding it. But there has to be buy-in from the entire school staff, and I think that's really important, because I don't think that's the case now, and I think that's something that has to be figured out. And I'm not just talking about teachers. I'm also talking about our CSAs, because it's not clear whether or not they gather cell phones. And so there's some of the things that I think has to be addressed as well.
Okay. Now we're getting to when it gets confiscated. I'm wondering if you can speak to one of the things, some of the feedback we've heard is that, this is more from a parents and guardian or caregiver, like, I'm all for this, but I, have a job where I can't come pick up my student's phone after school. So I'm curious, do you require a parent or guardian, or is that, do you have something you'd recommend?
Yes. But before I answer that question, I do want to acknowledge that, at the start of the school year, and we will be looking at, just the implementation of our policy. I have no doubt that there's some blind spots here, and we'll address those as they arise. But yes, if we take a cell phone from a student, a parent or guardian must pick it up. And if they cannot be there at 4 o'clock, which is the time our offices close, it'll be there the next day. Because after all, the student we have a policy, and you don't get to pick and choose which policies you're going to follow. And so if a kid misbehaves, we require a parent or guardian to come in to address the issue, like if there's a fighting, if there's a drug infraction. And so this would just follow along those same lines.
It seems like there was some, I don't know if it was LA or New York, some policy I looked at where the first time the phone was taken away, the student could pick it up at the end of the day. Second time, the parent has to come. Or so there was an escalation.
Right, and we did that this past year, and without much success. It's just very clear. When you fight, on school grounds, there's a clear expectation what the discipline is going to look like. And it was very important to me that we didn't go from 0 to 100. We implemented a very robust cell phone policy this past year. And it was important to me that, and I think to both of us, that we shared this with our communities this past school year. So everyone was aware. We had an open house to discuss it at Grant, and then there was one at Beaumont as well. Our parents could go to either one of them. The one at Grant, I believe we had 8 folks show up, 3 of them were students. And you can speak for Beaumont. But our families were made aware of this past school year, and understand that we'll be sending out the policy to them within the next 2 weeks.
So you said only 8 families showed up?
Yeah, it was, I'll be honest with you, when I sent this out to the families and students, by the time I sent it to the students, they knew it was coming because I shared it with the teachers the previous day. And so it was being leaked, and so the students knew about it. But yet and still, when I hit that, send button to our students and families, I braced myself. To see what was going to be the pushback. To my surprise, there has been, I would say 90% of the conversations I've had with families have been positive. Not even like, I'm fine with this. Some have been like, hallelujah. I just had one of those parents at our Alumni Association picnic on Sunday said that, and I live in the community. And so parents don't have they don't have a problem stopping me at Fred Meyers. And the parents have been very happy, and they have acknowledged their kids aren't happy about it. but the response has been more positive than I expected.
So can I say something? Sure.
I will say the same case at Beaumont. We had very few parents show up. However, the ones that did show up were enthusiastic. We shared with our PTA. We shared in the written communication, the same as Grant. And we have not received a lot of emails showing concern or questioning this idea. So in our minds, it's like, yay, they're for it.
Great. Karina, did you have something you wanted to add?
I was just going to say that at MLC, the parents don't come until the third infraction. So that might have been where you were referencing.
And it does, I guess, there is a sort of safety valve that, or as determined by the school administration. So say somebody has a job where they just like can't even come the next day because that there could be some communication between the parent and the administrator that allows for something else.
And I think I'm wondering if Section E is more of a how to implement the policy. So if the policy is off and away, students don't have cell phones, then would E more fall under a how to make that happen, maybe in an AD or a school-specific policy? It's a wondering.
And also,
I guess I think we should have it in the policy because I think that should just be the expectation, like at the first level. What happens if you violate the policy? I think there's a lot of other details that can go in the AD, but I think there's some basic things because, like, you don't have any right to take my phone, and just it takes I think the conversation away from the teacher or the principal.
Right, and also I thought I heard the word emergency used. We've been very clear with our students and our families that if there's an emergency, they can come to the main office and call a parent or guardian, whomever, and parents can also call us. It was a year ago when I sent that original email out about our new cell phone policy. I asked parents to refrain from calling their students during the school day, and please, just limit to emergencies and call the main office. But still, this school year, I'm talking with the student about something that they may have done, and their phone ring, and they're like, "Mr. McGee, hold your point." And I'm like, "Really? You're going to answer your phone right now?" That's my mom. And more than once, it went something like this. Well, no, Mom, we had spaghetti last week. We need something different. And so it's even those type of things. And I'm not trying to make light of it, but as administrators, we're evaluating our teachers, and so we're often in the classroom in the back. Typically, I'm in the back of the classroom watching the teacher, but I can't help but notice students getting notifications on their cell phones, and they know me quite well, and they know I'm back there, but it's so difficult for them to avoid the temptation of looking. And so, again, just, another example of the challenges that our teachers face as they're trying to engage students in the classroom.
I think that going to the principal's office and making a phone call there, I know that we've got a generation of kids, and my kids included, that literally do not know how to pick up the phone. This is not a phone to them. It's everything else.
They're going to
camera.
Yeah, they are going to learn.
I'm talking about the skill of talking on the phone and walking down the hallway to make an emergency call. So I hope that we allow for some time for students to learn how to.
Well,
looking at JJ over here, like, have you ever?
I actually
they will adapt.
I had a student, and they will adapt. I have a student that, great kid, came to me and said, "Mr. McGee, can we do a video about the new cell phone policy?" And I said, hadn't thought about that, And I said, well, what do you mean? What would we do? And she said, well, just take a video. You could use me on how to use the phone. And I said, use the phone? What do you mean? She said, well, if I want to call my mom, how do I use this phone to be able to do so? And it was a reminder how old I am. Because many of our students, to your point, do not know how to use the traditional phones. And so if needed, we will absolutely, show them. It won't take long. But it is, just an example that it is a different world that they're growing up in, and the realization that they have normalized some of these problematic behaviors because they don't know any better.
So one thing also is the incoming from the parents, and sometimes when I call the main line of a school, because I happen to do that, you get an automated response, and frankly, there might be 8 choices, and the last one is stay on the line if you want to talk to somebody or if you want to talk to the principal. But it seems like we should also ask the schools to consider knowing that now parents won't, if there's some sort of emergency, they won't be able to call their students, they're going to be calling the schools. Because it seems like basically, I feel like sometimes when I call a school, you get we don't really want you to leave a message or you're not going to get a live person. And I could see if a parent was like, you're not allowing me to call my child. So just thinking about reverse engineering what it's like to be a parent with an emergency, and I used to be able to just call my child, but now I'm going to have to call the office so that I actually can get through to somebody.
No, absolutely. We've just had this conversation last week, with my business manager, and that's a horrible title for what she does. But she works with our secretaries very closely, and so we're trying to change our system to ensure that parents can get a live person as soon as possible, and making sure we have dedicated phones that are only used for students who need to outreach to their parent or employer for whatever reason.
Is it okay if I jump in? It sounds like there was a request to hear from some other schools in addition, and I don't have principals here with me, but I do supervise a group of middle, high school, and multiple pathways programs, and it's clear to me that not every school is in the same place. So clearly these 2 schools are ahead of some schools in terms of the pre-work that they have done. One of the schools that I supervise is Benson High School, which I know has had teachers offer public comment here on this topic. My understanding of where Benson is really working to clarify the policy for next year. They have a committee that's working on this issue. They've done the survey, but they are not at the place where they are committing to purchase Yonder pouches. I think they want to try and see if the new interventions that they have offered are going to take hold. So that is one example that I can share. I can also share that the middle schools that I supervise they all have an expectation that phones are off and away during instructional time. One school, Da Vinci, it's off and away all day. So they are at a different place where those principals are not coming to me saying, we have this expectation, but it's out of control. That is not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that, there are some infractions, but we are working through a process. So I just want to offer that that it sounds like the policy is broad enough to allow schools that are at the point that Beaumont and Grant are at to move forward in that direction, can do so, and that not all schools are at that same place.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that the policy, as it's currently constructed, doesn't say what the intervention is, like a Yonder pouch. So it's more setting, I think, the district-wide set of expectations, and this may be at a future meeting, Director Wong's, what the district shall provide the necessary support and resources for the schools to implement the policy. That maybe we get that, but we don't, the policy as currently contemplated isn't like, this is how you have to implement, or the tool. That's not how it's currently crafted. But it does set an expectation of a district-wide policy, which even if the principals aren't saying it, I mean, we're hearing it from a lot of places, that it would be helpful to have one standard so it doesn't change from school to school or classroom to classroom.
I appreciate hearing the range of support and people's considerations, but I'm really interested in looking at the peer-reviewed research, empirical research, and if we're trying to solve for our lowest performing kids, which is something we all need to focus on, that would be a really compelling thing to know, school by school, based on racial and income demographics, how this is playing out. I would hate to have a policy that didn't apply to all of our schools, and specifically for the schools that have our lowest performing kids.
I don't know if Dr. Cardona has some more.
Do you want me to share anything?
Yeah, please. You represent the K-8 perspective, which is yet another slice of this.
K-8s and pre-K-8s have between 8 and 9 grade levels, and so the policies vary a bit. Some are off and away. Some schools like Beverly Cleary K-8 collect them during advisory first period and give them back at the end of the school day already. For the most part, though, it's variance by school to school, but most are off and away for the majority of the day, and if they violate multiple times, they get picked up by the administrator. But it has not been as significant of an issue as it is, I think, in the comprehensive middle schools.
What age are you seeing, what grades are you seeing students bringing devices to school starting? Like, is it still middle school or is it third grade now?
Early as 4th or 5th. A lot of younger kids have watches as well, but mostly cell phones in the middle school, 5th grade, about that age.
Okay, so I'm going to say we already talked about F. I think what I want to do, just given the time, because I want to make sure that we talk about the resolution, the disciplinary consequences, what I would like to have come back is like, to me, this just refers me to the saying students refuse to adhere to the policy, the school may be subject to discipline as outlined in this district's students' rights and responsibility handbook. It's like, what is that?
That's our student conduct policy. We have a policy in place, and it's actually the administrative directive.
But like, what is the discipline?
I don't want to put it in. I didn't want to put it in because it may change again over time. Currently, if you go to the matrix, which is let me go.
So I guess what I'd say,
she's going to save me.
Well, I don't actually, because of the time. What I would like to do is have it sent to us so we could see like
what it is.
What it is, because that will give me a sense of like which. Do we have something specific about cell phones in there, or are we going to add something? But just like what that is, because we did have some comments of like, if students violate the cell phone policy, we don't want to have them like losing instructional time, or like just what is it? So
okay. Yes.
Getting it for the next meeting, and then this is a lot of the comment I think we got back from some of the teachers. We're now on the 3 staff responsibility for confiscated cellular phones. And then Eddie adding staff, the district will provide the necessary support and resources for the schools to implement this policy. It will be, I think, for the next meeting, like what is that? And I don't know that we need to put it in here, but what things do we need to consider? Because it can't be like, hey, if your school has a PTA that can buy resources, that's how you get to do it, and if you don't, you're going to have to implement some other way. I don't know if you want to speak to this, Eddie.
I added C because a couple concerns. So again, C is the district shall provide the necessary support and resources for the school to implement this policy. The number one reason I thought this was important was because it's the number one thing it serves as is a value statement that the district is here to support our schools. In order to implement something that we feel is good for our students, especially our students' mental health. And then it also came other reasons. As I was reading 3, right, like for example 3A, it gives specific instructions about, if district employees take physical possessions, that has to be locked away securely. You can't just put it on a locked desk or cabinet. And I was worried that would become a liability for teachers, because the reality of a teacher during classroom, especially if you have like a class of 30, you're making 1,000 decisions, a day, right, or a minute, and sometimes you have to decide, am I going to take the time to lock this away and stop instruction for a minute, and these kind of decisions are very difficult, And I'm just thinking about the reality of the situation. So like, if one thing that we hate as a district is when the state gives us unfunded mandates, right? When they make us do something, but they don't give us the money to do it. And we want to make sure we don't do the same thing to our schools and our staff, right? And so to make sure that, yeah, if we're going to, if a school comes to us and says, hey, we are almost there in implementing this policy, but these are some barriers, it is it is the PPS's district's job to make sure to provide what kind of the support necessary in order to get this done so that it has the most chance of success. And that's why I put that in there, or suggested that in there.
So are you looking for sort of a list or some ideas of what resources might be needed to carry out this policy?
The thing is, I purposely left it vague.
Okay.
And the reason for purposely leaving it vague is because what we need changes, right? For example, what if we, after the experiment that you two are carrying out in your schools, we find out that these pouches are awesome and they're a lifesaver? Great, this provides for that. But what if we find out those are not the solution, and maybe there's a better one somewhere else? It provides for that too. Or maybe it's support. Maybe we just need to send people to get in there and help implement systems, right? It could be that, right? And the reason I purposely left it vague is because then it's adaptable to our changing times.
And I think Dr. Franco wants to say something.
Dr. Franco.
Hi, everybody. Appreciate the conversation. I will just say to the Director Ong's point around support, and what I appreciate the policy, how the policy is starting to come about. That to me, like, I'm not talking about financial pieces. I think Yonder is an entirely separate issue. It's a tool, which obviously you're seeing with Beaumont and Grant, they're utilizing to help enforce the cell phone policy. You don't need Yonder to be able to do that piece. What you need is, distinct guidelines, a calibration of what these things mean, and then I think James had said it, it's a collective approach with the staff, right? Because we have schools who are obviously not using Yonder, who have very successful cell phone policies with off and away and those types of things. And so I just want to make sure that if we do put the support piece in there, that it's not necessarily a dollar amount that's attached to that. It could be, coaching on what is an effective policy without the use of like a Yonder or that type of thing. And I just want to make sure I just put that out there because, Yonder does come with the cost.
So could we answer that question by, instead of the district shall provide the necessary support and resources, but change that to and/or resources? So the district shall provide the necessary support and/or resources for the school to implement this policy.
Done. So I think this is a good time to transition, and I super appreciate all the input and the wisdom and the insights that was offered today. And it's a good way to transition because the next, just briefly, thing we're going to cover before we get to your resolution is the engagement. So we have included in the documents that were shared, there was a meeting with JJ and Frankie and Dr. Adams, myself, about designing a student survey. And so what you have in the packet is the sort of timeline that Dr. Adams put together, which basically lays out a timeline by which we'd get a survey in the field, and he'd work with all of us and the students student reps on what to include in the survey, and then we would have that data coming back. In addition, focus groups with the schools that currently have that will be like leading the way this fall that have tools and school-wide policies. We'll add in Cleveland in there as well, because apparently they're going to have restrictions as well. But that'll give us an opportunity not only to hear from students who this is a perspective concept, but also hopefully hear from students who are actively in the process of having school without their phones. Did you want to say anything, JJ, about?
Yeah, I was
these?
wondering if staff or if you could clarify what would the focus groups look like at Grant and Beaumont?
We don't have Dr. Adams here yet, but generally focus groups allows you to get more in-depth feedback, as allows you to do follow-up questions. It's pretty standard in polling when you're trying to survey opinions to do a poll which has sort of open-ended or like here's a variety of responses, but then to also add in focus groups because it allows you to have a sort of deeper conversation and to do follow-ups. So that's what we were thinking, that it would be valuable to have sort of a deeper set of conversations, maybe a different set of questions, and also you can adjust the questions in a focus group, whereas you can't with a survey because it's kind of a set thing, but you can adjust based on like what's being elicited or the feedback you're getting. Like you can decide to go deeper in a particular place or skip a topic altogether.
I'll just add also, so the survey is very quantitative, numbers, percentages of people that agree or disagree, and the focus groups are more qualitative. So yeah, to Julia's point, expanding on questions, kind of teasing out more, deeper information about the topic. Were you asking about, though, what the makeup of the focus groups would be? Like who would be invited?
Yeah, and like how it would like function.
I think we're going to have you have Dr. Adams answer that question because generally you try and get a representative sample, not just people who opt in, but more of a representative sample of a student body or whatever the group is you're surveying or putting in your focus group. And in terms of how they actually would be run, usually you have somebody who, the way generally a focus group it happens is you pull together the representative sample, you share what you're you give them an overview, you share with what you're trying to accomplish or what information you're trying to get. Generally, it's like how it will be used, and then it's like a conversation guided by the person who's leading the focus group. And it's usually somebody who's skilled, and that's what they do. Does that answer your question?
Also,
we're happy to also connect you with Dr. Adams.
Also, those groups, you want to make sure there's a broad range of opinions in the room, and you've got, income, race, all the diversity, you want to hear from as broad a range of people as possible, maybe different geographies.
It's usually not self-selected, so you try and get a representative group. It's used all the time in political campaigns but sometimes in campaigns it's like, we want to hear from, parents who are between 40 and 60 who live in North Portland, and you can create a focus group around that because of what you're trying to accomplish. But in this case, it would be at the individual school, what's a representative sample of the schools, versus just saying, hey, who wants to participate in a focus group, which then becomes a self-select. And
ask me about focus groups
again, really appreciate all the feedback and insights from the schools, very helpful. And we'll also be looking at how we engage with teachers and other staff. Eddie, thanks for already bringing a lot of information in, and I know, at least I'm getting a lot of emails from school staff already. And we'll also, I think we're all hearing from parents already, but figure out some other ways to solicit, not just the sort of yes or no, but maybe some nuances or what are the most commonly. And I think one of the things that would have value is like to come up with a FAQ, just so people aren't necessarily going to weigh in the policy, but more have questions about how it gets implemented or what does it mean.
Yeah, I agree with that, Julia, because we kind of know what we want the policy to be. So sending out, I was just talking to JJ about this, sending out and asking students for input when we're not really going to listen to it. I mean, we really have to have the questions be, what what are your ideas about implementation? Not
Yeah.
do you want it or not?
I think we'll listen to it, because I do think there'll be, well, we already have some nuances to the policy, and those will be further outlines. It's like, I think directionally, we know where we want to head based on what we know are the values, but also there's a lot of other things in here that aren't just like yes or no, but it's how it's done and the discipline and, so.
Yeah, so the survey will bring up those kind of questions.
Right.
Yeah.
Or like, and sometimes it's just in the survey, you find out like it's less about yes or no, but more about like, what are the questions people have? And there may be like an intensity, like definitely not during class time, but like, oh, maybe like at school activities or, I don't know, but that's what we'll find out, the intensity of opinion. So the next item on the agenda, and I'm just going to say, because of the time, I don't want to, we can save it for another meeting, but I want to have a conversation about legislation that passed last year around stipends for board members, and for me, this is an equity issue that's been raised a lot over the years of like the people who have privilege to serve on the school board have privilege because they have the resources that they can give a lot of volunteer time, and not everyone's in that position. We also all have different responsibilities, whether it's children or all the reasons why that prevent people from running for the school board. So I want to like start having a conversation about that. And then because we have 3 brave schools leading the way this fall on the cell phone, and that there's a lot of other schools that are very interested in, I think, following for the value reasons that have been raised. Director Wong, you proposed we have a draft in the meeting materials, a draft of resolution, and my understanding is would be sort of set the tone of like why we're doing this work. I mean, we should have it in the policy also because that's a timeless thing, but just to sort of set the tone for the broader school community. So why don't you share the outline of what you want to accomplish?
Thank you, and thank you, Director Bryn-Meyers, for giving time for this, because I feel this is a very important issue. So one of the biggest issues I want to address with this resolution, and again, this is the first time we're introducing it. I'm soliciting input from everyone. This is draft in big bold letters. One of the biggest problems, because PPS is such a big district, it's like a big boat, right? It takes a long time to turn, to change direction. And not only that, but we don't want to rush things and potentially do things unwell. We want to make sure we do it smart. And unfortunately, that just takes time, right? We just looked at the calendar outline about, we're collecting data this, and, it goes all the way to October before possibly some kind of policy getting in place, right? And that's kind of just the reality we deal with. At the same time, we're hearing from a lot of teachers and a lot of admin that are asking for something to be done. And we, as a board and as a district, are responsible to them and want to respond to that. And so one of the issues that I'm trying to address here is that educators, admin know the first couple weeks of school are really vital in terms of establishing routine and expectations among students. I mean, that for, I read so many classroom management books that says that's the first 2 weeks what you got to focus on. And right now we have a district where policies are kind of all over the place, right? We have some schools that are very strict and some are not. And we have a lot of teachers, as we just saw in that survey, something like 88, maybe 90% of teachers are in that survey saying that cell phones are a problem, right? And it would be kind of remiss of us to not respond to that. So the main goal of this draft resolution, and here I want to be very specific, I wanted to make sure this resolution was not a directive. I wanted to be more of a statement of values, right? And to show, to give, I guess this is a very difficult thing to, I guess my big ask here for this policy committee is, how do we do something that's not a directive, but it also show the district that we are moving in a direction? And so if you want to, kind of like, maybe there's some people who are on the edge of doing something, maybe giving a little nudge, being like, yeah, we're going to do something, and so if you want to do it, because we know that setting expectations the first couple of weeks of school is absolutely vital. So the point of this resolution is to kind of respond to our employees and what they're asking for, and say, hey, we heard you, and we are trying to do something. We're trying to do something well, and we're going to do something. And so that's the point of this draft. And also, once again, centering our students in this conversation. We're talking about, I love the way to put it, we're giving a 7-hour respite from these devices that we have so much peer-reviewed studies that show that it is a cause, not the cause, right, but a factor in mental health issues today. And this is not something that we can solve as a school. Unfortunately, it's not something we can solve as a school. It will require community help. It will require our society to help, our parents, our guardians, our students to be all in it. But what can we do? So again, we're trying to rephrase this as a value statement. So with that said, I would love anyone and everyone's input.
I would love to just given that we're trying to wrap this up, we're just going to go down the dais. So go ahead.
Yeah, I'm really happy to support this. I like that it states, it doesn't tell us what to do, but it talks about, the compelling reasons we have for doing something. And as to your point, it's hard to get everyone to put their shoulder to the wheel to steer the ship in the right direction. And I think it signals that something's coming. It's a way of bringing the community along. And yeah, I think it's great. I appreciate you drafting it. I don't have any critical comments at this point. But I just want to appreciate you for putting it out here for us to vote on as a whole board.
Thanks. Should also thank Roseanne too, because
thank you to Roseanne too.
Patty?
I am in total support of this. I really appreciate you putting that together, Eddie, and I'm really excited about where we're going with this. So just thank you. Totally approve it.
Yeah, thank you, Director Wong, for putting this together. I just look forward to hearing our student feedback, because I think at this process currently we've kind of lacked in that, but yeah.
We're just beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, so my feedback is in the, thanks for putting this together. My quick review of it is in the recitals. I would make sure that we're sort of paralleling the language in the draft policy. So whatever it is that we're calling them, here you call it personal smart devices, but we should have some consistency of language. In the recitals, I would add in references to the Surgeon General's report and perhaps some of the peer-reviewed. Just, it's good in the recitals to build the case for why you're doing it. On E, it says will no longer be able to access their cell phones. I would say have restrictions on their cell phones, because having the access assumes that, it sounds like even across the 3 schools it's somewhat different. So I would just be like, there's restrictions at those schools on cell phones and other devices, or again, using consistent language with the policy. Then in the resolved, the second sentence, the PPS Board of Education is committed to supporting student mental health and learning, and recognizes that creating, and then I would add a district-wide board policy, because I think that the thinking here is like, we're doing something district-wide that's going to apply to everyone, which is what I've heard from teachers, is like, we don't want to have like different school by school or classroom by classrooms. I would say, and then I would be clear the verb, restricting the use of whatever we're going to call them, versus just on the use. It's like clear that there's going to be restrictions. It's not just a policy on them, it's about restricting the use. And at the end of that sentence, this is critical for students to achieve I would add academic outcomes we believe they're capable of, and then I would add something on the mental health improvements that we want to see. Number 2, I would actually shorten the piece about adding the specificity about student engagement. I'm not sure that we need the specificity that you're going to do. I think you can say just do a combination of a survey and some focus groups. But I would add in that we're also going to solicit the feedback from school staff, parents and family, district administrators, so that it's broader, and our labor union partners. I think we should call that out. And then I would add a number 3 that I think, Eddie, this goes to the point that you really have been raising, is something to the effect of educators, school administrators, and staff will be engaged on how best the district can support the implementation of the proposed policy. Just signaling that's a place, sort of a core value. So that's my.
Yeah, those are all great. Thank you.
Yeah, I also wonder, when Benson was here last time, we talked about hopefully having a policy that we could really put into place when the second semester starts, because that's another time when you're really meeting with your students. And I wonder if we want to try to put that in, or is that getting too specific on time?
Here's what my suggestion would be. I think we can speak to that, perhaps as an aspiration. I also think we're setting aside time this fall to really solicit a lot of information from a lot of different schools who are in different places. That if we say we're going to do it here, the impression may be like this particular date, like they're just going to rush to meet that and maybe not listen to us, or let's say I think it's better to get it right than to push it. I think we can speak to that. I don't know if we need to put it in the resolution, and certainly we can build the committee schedule so that we meet that, and the 21 days public comment and everything else. But keep our eye on that as the target without
committing ourselves to it. Okay, sounds good.
Does that work? Yeah. Is there anything else for the good of the order, or anything anybody wants to add for the committee agenda?
No. Director Brim Edwards, I did want to note before we adjourned that the person who was signed up for public comment did arrive.
Oh, great.
We called them. Would you like me?
That's awesome. Are they virtual or are they here?
I believe they're here.
Oh, great. Come on up. I'm sorry we missed you at the beginning.
Sorry I was late.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you for speaking up. And thank you for coming today.
And making it in person. So my name is Kira Caspary. I'm an education researcher, and I also have a student at Roosevelt High School. So I'm a parent. And I just want to thank you. This has been a great discussion. I am really happy that you all are talking about putting a cell phone restriction policy in place. And I'm really worried about both student learning, student skill development, and teacher burnout with the current state of things as I'm seeing them and hearing about. So I was on the Psych Council this year at Roosevelt, and we spent most of the time talking about a cell phone policy to roll out this coming year. And that planning work was led by the climate team at Roosevelt, Sophie Hanashian and Kira Say. And at the beginning of those conversations, I asked the principal at Roosevelt if it would be helpful if the district had a policy, and her response there was a resounding yes. Like, yes, I need something to, you guys are offering to take the heat, and I think that is super helpful. We had really broad consensus about the problems that cell phones have introduced in schools, but it was harder to figure out what to do. I think it's super helpful to hear what you've done at Grant and Beaumont. But we did hear a lot about how cell phones have negatively affected school climate, and that there's escalation in student conflicts that sometimes staff don't even know about because it's happening online, and so they can't intervene early. As you think about the language of the policy, I guess I'm thinking about what you said, Director Wong, where I think, policies in the research I do, there are a lot of, it's really in the implementation, right? Like you can have things on the books. And I think to be successful, this is a really big culture shift in terms of students are used to having their phones and parents are used to being able to access their kids during the day. And so we're going to need help in terms of, as parents, to understand. And I would encourage you to really think about that. And can we have a district-wide conversation about the harm that's being done? I think parents we're used to the convenience, but we don't actually see the degree of the harm that's happening. And it's quite large. So I know at Grant they used some of the Screenagers movies, and they screened them at Roosevelt. Like the climate team looked at them. And I wonder if that would be a tool, for example, something that the district could do. But I'd love to see that. I think there's a lot of, in the research and some of the guidance about how to do this, a lot of it is like, it's not just about a policy, it's also about, you start not just with asking for input, but education. And my final point would just be that I really agree I do work on student voice, and I think it's really important, but I think it's very important to not ask for input when you're not genuine. So only put on the table the parts of it that are actually up for discussion, and not, if you know that like some things are not up for debate, then don't ask students if they want them or not, because none of us, I think we all struggle, right, with our phones. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, I'm so glad she said that. Also about educating the parents. That's going to be very important, and educating the students too about the addiction, because I don't think people understand it. I know I don't understand it. I'm just starting to learn about it. And I think if we put that out there, like you said, so people know why we're doing this, make a big difference.
I wanted to say I loved that too, the idea of a community-wide conversation about the harms. It's really compelling that the people in Silicon Valley don't allow their children to have access to cell phones. And so, yeah, I think the education piece is really important, and I'd love to see us take the time to have conversations with people. And also, yeah, community engagement 101, if something's non-negotiable, then that's not something that we discuss. But I think clarity of what we're trying to solve, we know it's a mental health issue, and we know of the dangers, and we are morally obligated to do something about it.